In 1814, Napoleon was defeated. 3.5 million dead littered the battlefields of Europe, from Iberia to Moscow. But, for the first time in a generation, Europe was at peace. This ended a 20-year run of French dominance, 20 years of redrawing borders, toppling empires, and spreading revolutionary ideas across the continent. Now, the victorious coalition faced a question. How do you put the genie back in the bottle? The answer would come from the Congress of Vienna, and from one man, Klemens von Metternich. Metternich was a conservative in the truest sense. He wanted to conserve the old order. Monarchy, aristocracy, stability. He looked at the French Revolution and saw only chaos and death, and he was determined to prevent it from ever happening again. His solution was elegant. The great powers, Austria, Russia, Prussia, Britain, and eventually France, would work together to maintain the balance. No single nation would dominate. No single nation would be allowed to grow so large that they could dominate. And more importantly, no ideas would be allowed to spread. Nationalism crushed. Liberalism suppressed. Revolutionary movements intervened upon, and by force if necessary. And, for a while, the system worked. The concert of Europe kept the peace. Metternich's diplomatic skill held together an alliance of powers with very different interests. Alongside the concert of Europe sat the Holy Alliance, Tsar Alexander's brainchild, a pact between Russia, Austria, and Prussia. However, this pact was grounded more in Christian mysticism than practical diplomacy. Alexander envisioned the monarchs of Europe bound together by Christian brotherhood, pledging to rule with justice and charity. Metternich thought it was nonsense, but he signed it anyways. It was useful. However, there was a darker side to Metternich. His Austria became a police state, censorship, surveillance, secret police infiltrating universities and newspapers. Dissidents were arrested, exiled, silenced. It was order, but it was an order maintained through fear. Britain's representative at the Congress of Vienna was Lord Castlereagh, the Foreign Secretary. He and Metternich worked closely together, but they were not the same. Castlereagh, like Metternich, cared about the balance of power, preventing any single nation from dominating Europe the way France had. He was willing to work with Metternich's system to achieve that. But Castlereagh was not an ideological crusader. Britain had no interest in sending troops to Europe to crush liberal movements in Spain or Naples. Britain had a parliament. Britain had a free press. And Britain had interests, commercial interests, that did not align with Metternich's vision of a frozen, conservative Europe. Castlereagh walked a tightrope, cooperating with the concert of Europe, but keeping Britain's distance from its more repressive interventions. It was a delicate balance to walk. And, in 1822, it ended, when Castlereagh, exhausted and possibly suffering from a mental breakdown, took his own life. Castlereagh's successor was George Canning, and Canning was a different kind of statesman. Where Castlereagh was cautious, Canning was bold. Where Castlereagh worked within the concert of Europe, Canning was willing to break from it. When the Holy Alliance, Russia, Austria, Prussia, wanted to intervene in Spain's American colonies to restore royalist control, Canning said no. He recognized the independence of the new Latin American republics, opening them to British trade and influence. "I called the New World into existence," he famously declared, "to redress the balance of the old." When Greece rose up against Ottoman rule, Canning supported them, siding with a nationalist, liberal revolution against an established empire. Metternich was horrified. And Canning was a vocal opponent of the slave trade, pushing Britain's growing abolitionist stance onto the international stage. Where Castlereagh wouldn't, Canning did. This was a Britain that was no longer just balancing power. It was actively promoting a liberal, commercialized world order, one that looked very different from Metternich's vision of a frozen Europe. Metternich's system held for a generation. It was the longest-lasting peace between great powers in history. But the forces that he tried to suppress, nationalism, liberalism, the demand for representation, they did not disappear. They simmered. And in 1848, they exploded. Revolutions swept across Europe. Metternich himself had to flee Vienna in disguise. The Concert of Europe limped on, but the cracks never fully healed. And some of Metternich's methods, the secret police, the surveillance states, the belief that order and stability justified violent repression, they did not die with the old order. The 20th century would have its own architects of an oppressive world order. Britain, meanwhile, had charted a different course. Not always consistently, not always nobly, but by the time Canning was done, Britain had positioned itself as something more than just another conservative power clinging to the old world. The balance of power mattered, but so did the kind of world that power was meant to preserve.